So happy to see everybody to start out a new year. I'll give everybody, there's still a couple more getting some food and then we'll get started. Okay, will you join me in the prayer? Dear Father, another new year is upon us. Time once again to reflect on changes we want to make in our lives, new things to be included. We ask for the Holy Spirit's guidance as we each consider our goals as Christians in this crazy world we live in. Our hearts are heavy today, Lord, as we suffer along with the people in California with the fires. And we ask for your caring hand to touch those in California, as well as those of us that are not with us today, and those that are. Be with Rick today as he shares his thoughts with us, and may we each leave today with new insight. In Christ's name, amen. I think we're doing well on refreshments. I think April is the only month we have left. If there's anyone is that correct, Jane?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So the sign-up sheet's in the back, or talk to Jane and, a couple of you. That would be great. Does anybody else have anything they'd like to share? Shelley or Ellen or anyone have anything?
Well, I'll just say I have 4 books confirmed already for next year. And I just received a few more ideas or suggestions from Walt. So if you've read something, please be sure to pass the title along. Thank you.
Yeah, it's always good the more people we have looking and reading, it's always good to give new ideas. And of course, Walt has done this before. Next month we'll be reviewing one of his suggestions from last year, so that'll be good. Ellen, you have anything today, or?
As far as the book's concerned, we hope to have the books in hand by the end of February. So if anybody's interested, let me know. Thank you.
That won't be long. Okay, Karen, where are you, Karen? Are you hiding in the kitchen, or?
I'm eating the leftovers.
Thank you. There you are. Okay, thank you very much for the food. Delicious. Scones and fruit back there. Anybody wants another cup of coffee before we get started? Why? Go ahead and grab it. Yeah, I think we've got enough chairs. I think we're doing all right. Okay. Great. Okay, well, Rick Taylor was born and raised in Detroit, Michigan. And as I told you last time, of course, Jim and I lived there. We didn't know them there, but he was born and raised there. He graduated from the University of Michigan, attended medical school at the University of Texas branch at Galveston. Back to Michigan for his residency in internal medicine and pediatrics. And that was followed by a fellowship in pediatric critical care. He served as a professor of pediatric critical care at the University of Texas Health Science Center here in San Antonio from 95 to 2019. He and his wife, Deborah, who's here as well, and will be back later this year to review also, have 4 adult children, and I had from last year 10, but I know you have 11 grandchildren. Yes, and they would be very happy to share that their second child has now moved from Kentucky to Dallas to work, and so now they have all their kids in Texas. And they had all 11 grandchildren over the holidays, all under the age of 8. So the fact that he's here, that he got the book done, I mean, this is kind of amazing. Without further ado, Rick, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Grace. Very nice introduction. So the book we're going to talk about today is The Covenant of Water by Verghese. So I'll start with just a little bit of background on him. Dr. Verghese is currently a professor and vice chair for theory and practice of medicine at the School of Medicine at Stanford University. He was born in Ethiopia in 1955, and he went to medical school at the Madras Medical School in India, and then came to the United States and did PGME's postgraduate medical education at East Tennessee State University, and he became an infectious disease physician, and then was at a few different institutions over the years. He happened to be here in San Antonio at UT Health Science Center from about 2000 to 2007. And so he's sort of like our own boy. So I want to say a few things. I don't normally really want to talk about me, but I do want to say a few things because it's sort of relevant to this discussion. Shelley had asked me to read this book and review it, and at first I was a little bit hesitant because it's really long, and it's really good, but it's not exactly the type of book that I like to read for pleasure reading. But as I reflected on it, it has a lot to do with medicine. Dr. Verghese really loves medicine. If you've read this book, I think you can tell that. And I really love medicine. I actually, I was almost thinking of Paul when he says, if someone is really, really fervent, I'm even more fervent. Well, I really, really liked medicine. It is the perfect career for me. I feel like God called me to do it, and everything about it I love. And I think I also feel incredibly blessed to be able to help people through that. And one of the reasons I'm telling you this is because I might say some things later in this talk that might sound like I don't like medicine so well, but I actually really like medicine. And I think it's really good. The other thing about my career is, my specialty is pediatric critical care. And although I feel very blessed in my own life, in my profession, on a daily basis, I had the opportunity to be trying to help people who are experiencing the absolute worst thing in life, which is a child who is critically ill. And we took care of children in car wrecks and gunshot wounds and stabbings and child abuse and cancer and heart disease, and it sort of goes on and on. And so this story, I think a major theme is suffering and people being challenged by life and death and things that, that happen in life. And I think it's sort of a tragedy. I think, we'll get more about that later, but, and I think I have some perspective on human suffering from my career, and so for all of those reasons, I thought this would be a good book for me to review and to discuss. A little bit about just general information about the book. It was very well received. Goodreads, which is not exactly, like the Nobel Prize, but Goodreads, they thousands and thousands of readers gave it a 4.43 rating, which is really, really high. And Oprah, there's just looking at my screen that keeps popping up. So anyway, Oprah Winfrey chose this for her book club, and she said, it's one of the best books I've read in my entire life. It's epic, it's transformative. Many moments during the read, I had to stop and remember to breathe. I couldn't put the book down until the very last page. It was unputdownable. And so Oprah's not alone. There's a lot of people who feel very strongly that's very, very good and meaningful book. Um, my overall appraisal is to agree. I think it's like a masterpiece of literature. Uh, I think that he is very, very skilled and a very good writer and knows how to tell a story and has a number of important themes that he is addressing in the book. Um, it's a very intricate and multi-story story. I don't think it's going to be possible for me to touch on all aspects of the stories within the story. There's major characters I'm not even going to mention. So at the end, feel free to ask questions or people to make comments about things that maybe I didn't cover. It reminded me a little bit of Charles Dickens, just in that David Copperfield, I remember reading that many years ago, and there were so many characters and they would like show up for 100 pages and then disappear for a few hundred pages and then they'd be back in the story in different settings and they were all sort of interconnected. And there's a lot of that in this book. There's a lot of characters. At some points you don't really know, well, why is this, that seems like an entirely different story, but they're all sort of connected. And it does sort of come together as a unified story. But I have a little bit of criticism that we'll get to at the end. But overall, I would give it like a very high rating. So this story takes place in India, in a town called, I hope I pronounce this right, Parambil, that is a fictional town in Travancore, which is a state region on the southern west coast of India, in the current state of Kerala. And let me just step over here. So this is India. Kerala is sort of this part of India, and then Travancore is like a small area down here. And this larger area is also called the Malabar Coast. And it's also where the Spice Coast was. And so very early, like in the Middle Ages, there was a lot of trade gone back and forth there because of the spices and whatnot. So that's what it got the name Spice Coast. And then this just shows the same thing with, mainly it takes place right down in this little area here. And this is a picture of, just a picture of Kerala. And as you can see, it's very pretty lush, lots of water. It's another picture from that area, lots of water, lots of rivers and canals, and then the ocean, of course. And I just include these to sort of give you a feeling of what the topography and what the place looks like. He happens to mention this particular picture those are fishing nets at a particular port that he mentioned in the book, sort of in passing. So just for that purpose. The people that he's writing about are primarily members of a community that call themselves the St. Thomas Christians. And where this comes from is traditionally, they believe that St. Thomas, after Jesus rose from the dead and this church started getting settled, that he went to India to evangelize and then develop Christianity in a church in India. There's no real solid evidence that St. Thomas went there, but there is evidence that Christianity started developing in that part of India in the late first century. And so the Encyclopedia Britannica seemed to sort of buy it, like maybe it wasn't really St. Thomas, but at least Christians emigrated there very early, and so there's been a continuous community of St. Thomas Christians pretty much, most of the last 2,000 years. And they were initially aligned more with the Eastern Orthodox churches, and then later on also sort of aligned with the Western Church. And I put a question mark. I believe that they were also recognized by the Roman Catholic Church at some point in time. They're just trying to do a little bit of background reading on St. Thomas Christians. It seems like they're fairly Orthodox Christians and believe, most of the major tenets of Christianity. Um, and this community, which goes back so far, is very cohesive. They have been there for all this time, and it's not exactly a closed community. Like, I don't get the impression that they didn't want outsiders or anything like that. But it's just a close-knit community, and families go back for many, many years. And that's been important for this story because all these people are interconnected. And as we'll talk about a little later, they're interconnected genetically as well as socially and their support systems and like that. So I'm going to focus on what I see as the big picture of this story. And then like I said, there's many, many other stories that are going on with it, and they're sort of all connected to the big picture. But I'll try to at least give you the big picture. So it's mostly about this family that starts when this 12-year-old girl has an arranged marriage, and she has to move. I'm not sure exactly how far, but it's far. Like, it's a big move. She's leaving her family and being attached to this other family, in an arranged marriage at 12 years old. And then as she goes through life, she has children, and they have children, and this is a history of that family starting with her until nearly the present time, not quite the present time, but at least into the 1970s. It was, I think, 1897 when she had the arranged marriage, and so this sort of mostly is the early 20th century, but starting off in 1897. So she's never actually given the name in the book, but she gets the name Big Amachi, is what people called her. And the man she married was 40 years old, so there's a big age difference there. He is given a name, but it's only used like once or twice, and mostly he's called Big Apachin. And so I won't refer to him by name too much, but in the book it's called Big Apachin. He had a son named Jojo from a previous wife. He was a widower, and his wife had died. And so when Big Amachi went at 12 years old and married him, she sort of inherited a son who was, I think, a few years old. And so he's sort of her stepson. And some of this I'm going to come back to some. Right now I'm just going to go through the people, and then I'll come back and sort of tell their stories a little bit more. So Big Amachi and her husband had two children. One they called Baby Mole, and I think I'll talk about this a little bit more later too. But Baby Mole turns out to have had congenital hypothyroidism and was severely developmentally delayed, and was diagnosed by a doctor that they went to see, and a very kind doctor, and the way he explained it is, she's a wonderful person, and she's just always going to be a child. She'll be a child the rest of her life. And so that's the way we see Big Mo as a wonderful person, happy, brings life into the family, but always childlike. Her brother, Philippos, um, is going to be in the story a lot, and I'll come back to that. So Philippos ends up marrying a woman by the name of Elsie, and we'll talk about her a lot. And he had a son named Ninan, who died as a child, and we're going to talk about that. And he also we'll come back to this, but he apparently had a daughter named Mariama, and it turns out that she's actually like a stepdaughter. She's not really his daughter, but through most of the book until almost the very end, she believes that he's her father, and so we'll include her in that part of the family tree. So that's the family mostly. Then there's a few other major characters. There's a lot of other major characters, but ones I'm going to emphasize is there's a man named Digby who was an Irishman who grew up in Scotland, and him and his mother were Catholic, and that part of Britain was not Catholic, and Catholics were really looked down upon. And one of the things that resulted in his mom became very much of an activist for the workers. Well, sounds like she was sort of like starting a union or something. Because of that, she lost her job. She became despondent and she committed suicide. He was relatively young. So Digby was able to get into medical school in Scotland and become a doctor, but he felt like he would never be able to be a surgeon, which is what he really wanted to do with his life. So he emigrates to India because he knows if he goes to India, there's good hospitals in India, and actually British run hospitals that would welcome him as a learning surgeon. He could learn how to be a surgeon. So he goes to India for the purpose of pursuing surgery. Elsie, who is the woman who marries Philippos, he's the daughter of some friends of Digby. And the story talks a lot about how they became friends and all. I think the big story, to say friends of Digby, Elsie has a lot of artistic aptitude, and even as a daughter, she really liked to draw, and it was just very artistic. She will prominently play a role in Digby's life, and we'll talk about that. She's much younger than him, so they're actually like two different generations. He's probably, I don't know, 30 years old. I don't know the exact difference in age. He's an adult when they first come together, and she's just a child. So we'll talk about them in a bit. So a very, very brief overview of the main story. So Bigamachi, she's the matriarch. She's a good person. She's really a very good person. She's what keeps everybody going, keeps the family together. She's the glue that holds the family together. When she gets married, she's obviously very young, and some people who read this book react like, oh, that's bad, get arranged marriage at 12 years old, The man she marries, fortunately, is a good man, and he's a widower, and he's still really mourning, I think, the loss of his wife. And he's also very respectful to this girl that he marries, and they don't have sex or really much of a intimate relationship for several years until she's old enough. So he's very respectful of her in that way. The son, Jojo, so he's the son of the man, but the stepson of Megamachi. He died as a child after she had been sort of in the role of his mother for a couple of years. He died in this sort of freak drowning incident where he knew that he was not supposed to go in the water. I think he had a fear of water. But his father also like, don't go in the water. You can't go in the water because people in this family tend to drown. And so he ended up drowning as he was swinging on like a rope and fell into what sounds like a puddle, or maybe maybe very small lake, but it's described more like just a puddle. And he drowns in a small body of water as a like a school age child. I don't remember his exact age. Um, so after that, Bigamachi and her husband had the two children, baby Mo, and Philippos. As we talk about baby Mo, she's a wonderful person, childlike for the rest of her life. Is that I think that's all I have to say about it right now. Philippos is bright. He's intelligent. He is very interested in learning. He has gets some tutoring from a gentleman in the village. Starts reading Moby Dick. Like every night, reads a few pages of Moby Dick. Finishes after a few months, and that's not that easy. From Moby Dick when I was in high school, but he also starts reading other literature. He's just become very, very interested in learning and education, and I think it's Bigamachi who thinks that he should become a doctor. And she's encouraging him to go off to the university to study medicine. But he's not interested in that. He's really interested in like this, literature and writing. So he does then go to the university in Madras and is studying there. But he doesn't do very well. I'm not sure that he exactly flunked out, but he was not performing very well. And part of it was because one of the things he was running up against was this prejudice against Native Indians. The school was more a British school, and the descendants of Britain have much more status than Native American or Native Indians. And so there's some of that, but part of that results in him having to sit way at the top of the amphitheater, and he can't hear. And then he ends up finding out that he has sensory neural hearing loss. And that's one of the reasons he's not doing well in school. And so he pretty much gives up on formal education and decides to go back to the hometown of Rango. And while he's traveling back on the train, he meets this woman who they just hit it off really well. And that woman is Elsie. And they don't realize it at first, but when they get back and they start thinking about it, they realize that I'm not sure if I could, but she and Philippos met each other when they were children. And so there's some history there. But they fall in love and get engaged, and she's enthusiastic about marrying him, but she has sort of a stipulation. It's like, I really like to get married, I would like to get married, but I really want to pursue my art. And I want, a husband that is not going to, a husband who's going to support me in my work in art. And it's not exactly like an ultimatum, but it's, she made it really clear that was really important to her. Um, and I'm sorry, I am going to backtrack just a little bit because I realize I didn't. So the way that they met, but one of the things that happens with Philippos when he's a child, sorry, I'm going to backtrack to his childhood. When he was a child, there was monsoon. The river was like overflowing. Um, and Philippos also is terrified of water. But he finds this boy who is really having trouble breathing. He's probably got epiglottitis, which is swelling of a structure in your throat that helps protect your airway. But when it swells up, then you can't breathe. And this boy was really struggling to breathe. And at great peril to himself, Philippos takes this boy upriver and finds this doctor at a leprosy colony, who is Digby. So Digby has ended up at this leprosy colony. And so when he gets there, Digby, for reasons I'll tell you in a minute, is a doctor and he's trying to take care of the patients at the leprosy colony, but he can't use his hands because his hands have been injured severely. So Digby was able to talk Philippos through the operation of doing a tracheostomy. And so I think Philippos is something like seven years old or something like that at that time. And that's how he met Digby. And that's also sort of how we met Elise as a child, was through that. One of the side stories, it's just a little bit, but that boy, he saves his life by doing the tracheostomy, and then this is just the tragedy of life. He just mentions it. The boy then died of another infection sometime months or years later. And so there's that sense of tragedy, like he saved his life, but then the boy died anyways. Um, so getting back to Digby, the reason Digby can't operate is because his hands were severely injured in a fire. The reason he was in a fire was when Digby first moved to India, he was at this hospital where he was supervised by this one surgeon. And this one surgeon is like the only one of the very few really bad people in the book. Dr. Verghese is a very positive outlook on people, and almost all the characters are really good people. But this one doctor is not a good person. And then he happens to kill a patient by malpractice, does an operation in a way that he shouldn't have. And actually, Digby was there telling him not to do it, but he did it anyways. The patient dies. And there's going to be this inquest on this surgeon. And Digby and the surgeon's wife have just become platonic friends at like a party. They just kept talking and they have similar interests about art and things like that. And so they become friends, but the supervising surgeon tells his wife that she needs to get Digby to testify in his defense. And he actually says, otherwise I'm going to say that you're having an affair with him and like ruin both of you. And so they weren't having an affair, but then they got together under the auspices of this threat, and they end up having sex and falling asleep, and then the building catches on fire, and the woman is killed, and Digby's hands are severely burned. So that's why later on he can't use his hands. So then Digby's dejected and feels guilty, and he sort of wanders around and ends up going to this leprosy colony where there's an elderly and very humane doctor who actually is very, very highly qualified surgeon who, because he wants to help mankind, had settled in this leprosy colony, and that surgeon is able to perform some surgery on Digby's hands to make them more usable. And one of the reasons he can do that is because of experience that he has had taking care of leprosy patients, because leprosy is very deforming to your hands and to other parts of your body. And so this is like plastic surgery that's sort of specialized, and he's able to help Digby regain some function of his hands. And that's when Digby meets Elsie, because Elsie, this other surgeon brings Elsie in because he just thinks that she would be good for him because she draws and is into art, and that she's able to help him learn to draw a little bit. And so sort of art therapy. And so that's the way the Digby and Elsie met. Now, years later, back to where I was, so Philippos and Elsie are both traveling back to the hometown, and they fall in love, and they get married with the proviso about her art. In their newlywed period, when everybody is madly in love with each other, Elsie asks Philippos actually wants to do something for her. He says, "I will do anything for you. Like, ask me for the moon. I'll do anything. I love you so much." And she doesn't really give him an answer right away, but then I think, just at one point she says, "Well, there's that tree that's right outside our window. Could you cut down that tree because it really blocks the sun and blocks the view?" And she didn't know this, but this tree was a tree that his father used to climb up and sit up in the tree and ponder things and meditate. And his father really liked to climb trees, and this particular tree was one of his climbing trees. So Philippus can't bring himself to actually granting her desire to cut down the tree. And that causes some friction, but it's not terrible. I mean, she didn't really necessarily expect he was going to do anything she asked. But there's that lingering tension there. They end up having a son named Ninan, and they both adored this son. And Ninan actually, we'll talk about the condition in a minute, but Ninan seems to also have this condition. And so the family members who have the condition can't swim, they drown if they get in water, but for some reason instead they like to climb trees. And so Ninan climbs this tree, and excuse me, some of the branches have been cut off because Philippos was trying to do part of what she had asked, but he still couldn't bring himself to cut down the tree. But Ninan climbs the tree and falls and gets skewered on some of the branches that had been cut off, very sort of sharp, sticking up, and is killed. And when he falls, Philippos is like frantically trying to climb the tree to get to him, and he falls or jumps off, and he severely injures his ankles, and so he's almost crippled, and has lots of pain and lots of problems from that related to pain and injured ankles. The biggest injury, though, is that Elsie and Philippos become very estranged because of this. And this is a real thing with families who lose their children to an accident, drowning, or any accident where maybe one parent was sort of supposed to be in charge of watching them. It's very, very rough on families, and she really picks up on this in this book. Like, Elsie and Philippos really are strange, and they're both feeling guilty, and they're both blaming the other one. He should have cut down the tree, but she shouldn't have asked him to cut down the tree. That's sort of like in their minds. Um, and so they're having a lot of trouble letting go of the blame and the grief. Elsie then leaves to return to her parents' house and where she grew up. But baby Mole gets sick, and so Big Amachi asks Elsie to come back, because Elsie and baby Mole had a real good rapport with each other. And so she comes back and she spends some time in Parango with this family. Because of his injuries and his guilt and his shame, Philippos has become a pitiable narcotic addict, and is like just barely living. And he's really withdrawn. He is living for his next dose of narcotics, and it's really painful reading, because it's like you say, Philippos. I hope I didn't say it wrong. Philippos, and you just sort of want to like get inside his head and say, be trapped together. But he has trouble with that. And while Ozzy's back home, they do make love one time. And Elsie's going to leave, but then there's a monsoon, and she can't really leave right away. So she stays a few months longer, and then and soon becomes aware that she's pregnant. And so she stays until the baby's born. A few months later, the baby's born premature. There's quite a obstetrical discussion about the delivery of that baby. It's quite detailed. But Bigamachi and some of the other women in the community are able to safely bring this baby into the world. Before this baby is born, though, Philippos sees this as his salvation. He is absolutely convinced that this baby is going to be a boy, and is going to be the reincarnation of the boy who skewered himself to death. So much that he has like a Hindu shaman type person come and predict, before the baby's born, predict it's going to be a boy. And so he's just, it's going to be a boy, it's going to be a boy. However, it's a girl. And so, he's just having that, this just adds to his troubles, because he was wrong about that. But Elsie also, she starts this work, the sculpture that she's doing, chiseling on rock, and it's like a woman's head, and she's gotten pretty far along with it, and in some sort of drug altered mind craze, the big one night destroys it, breaks it, and
Philippos.
oh yeah, I'm sorry, Philippos. Yeah. Yes, Philippos does that, and so he breaks this very important thing to her, and she doesn't react that much actually, but then shortly after that, she went to the river and never came back. And they're convinced that she drowned. They find some of her belongings near the river. Can't find her. They look for a body. They can't find a body. And it appears that Elsie has drowned. That baby is named Mariama. And years later, Mariama has grown into a young woman, and she's very intelligent and capable, smart girl. She she picks up the idea of medicine. She really wants to study medicine. And so she gets admitted to Madras medical school and goes to medical school. About that same time, Philippos sees, I think it's like an ad in a magazine or some sort of flyer of a piece of art that's going to be exhibited, and it occurs to him that that's like the only person who could have done that is Elsie. So he really, really wants to find her, and he has otherwise gotten his life much better organized and is doing much better. Um, so he is going to travel to Madras. I think it's Madras where the art was supposed to be exhibited, in hopes of finding his true love. However, on the trip, the train derails into a lake, and and many people are killed, including Philippos. And Philippos is killed when he actually sees another boy who's drowning. He tries to help that boy, but then they both drown. So Philippos drowned, has died. While in medical school, Elsie works in a pathology lab doing some research for one of her professors. And when she finds out that Philippos died, she's able to examine his brain. And what she discovers is tumors on his, we call it the eighth cranial nerve. It's the nerve that goes from your inner ear to your brain. And he has tumors on both of his cranial nerves, eighth cranial nerves on both sides. And that condition is part of a condition called neurofibromatosis or von Recklinghausen disease. And it's what you call an autosomal dominant, which means if a person has that, 50% of their children, or each child has a 50% chance of having the condition. So it tends to really show up in families. There's other types of inheritance that you have to have sort of two rare things come together, and so it doesn't really show up in every generation, but these type of genetic diseases tend to show up pretty much in every generation. And so she's able to determine that is what has been causing this condition in the family. She also is able to go back to her home at one point, and she really wants to reconstruct her father's life, her father's Philippos, his life, and he ended up keeping very detailed journals. I think there's something like 15 books of journals, and she sets about reading those, and then she discovers that he had discovered that he was not actually her father. So Mariama is discovering that who the man she thought was her father was not her father. She also then is able to sort of remember that Digby and Elsie sort of used to know each other, and somehow puts together in her mind she thinks that Digby is probably the father. By this point in the story, Big Amachi and Baby Mo have died. They both just happened to die on the same night. And so now, that generation is gone. So Mariama is going to travel to the leprosy colony and confront Digby about her parent, or being her father. But when she gets there, Digby almost immediately knows why she's coming, and she watches him do like an operation, and then sort of at the end of the operation, he tells her, he just says, you know, yes, Elsie and Elsie and I got together, and I am your father. And he tells the story of what happened, that when Elsie was thought to have drowned in the river, she actually staged that. And she had met Digby before in her life, and I didn't really go into that a lot, but she knew him somewhat before in her life. And they had sort of, well, actually, I'm sorry, I'm confusing myself and I'm confusing. She had met him before, and that's when she had left Philippos to go live with her parents for a while. And Digby was like a really good friend to her, and they sort of fell in love, and that's how she got pregnant. And so when she went back to this small town, that's when she had this child, which is Mariama. And so he explains all this to her, and then explains that when she was thought to have drowned, Elsie actually set that up and then went back to live with Digby. But she also at that time found out that she had leprosy, and so the reason she took off and didn't stay around to be Mariama's mom and to raise her daughter was she knew she was going to get progressively more sick and deformed, and she, was worried about contagions. Babies are more susceptible to catching leprosy than adults are. So she was worried that if she stayed, Elsie would get leprosy, but even just as much, she would be an outcast from society. She would be shunned. She would never have a good life. So Elsie left with, for the purpose of trying to make sure that her daughter would have a better life. And so this is sort of the way this story ends, in that Elsie is now actually living at the leprosy colony, and Digby her and Digby have lived together for the last, I don't know, many years, and he's been very devoted to her, and he really, really loves her. She has progressed to the point where she can't use her hands. She can hardly walk. What happens with leprosy is it affects the nerves, particularly the pain-sensing nerves. So the good thing is you don't feel pain, but if you don't feel pain, you can't protect your joints, and so your eye's getting injured and you don't know it, and it destroys your joints, and leprosy also the destruction to muscle and skin to some degree. But the really big thing is you lose sensation, and it's very deforming because of that. And you lose sensation to your cornea. So you don't blink as much as you should. Your eyes dry out. If a sand or something gets in your eyes, you don't feel it. And for that reason, it's blinding too. So Elsie's blind. She can't use her hands. She can barely walk. And it's really, really sad. But she has made this sacrifice for her daughter. So this is like, you could almost say a Christ-like sacrificial thing that she's done with her life. She's given up her life for her daughter. I think I've said that stuff. She does, at the very end, she's trying to decide, well, should she actually get to know Elsie? It's not clear if she does. Elsie would come up to the window and put her hand on the window every day, and Digby would be on the other side of the window. They would be sort of touching through the glass. And she came up and did that, and Mariama put her hand on the glass. But that's about all we know about whether they eventually got to know each other. So, hopefully I haven't confused you too much, and that's the big story. Now some themes that were in it. So the condition. So the condition is this family knew for maybe generations that they were really likely to drown. That there was somebody in almost every generation that's drowned. It's sort of a superstitious, it's sort of superstitious, but it's not superstitious because in reality this was happening. And Big Amachi actually was able to fill in a family tree, like, from some other records that she found from her predecessor, the first wife of her husband. She was able to put together a family tree and see the condition, how it was going through the family tree. And so well, I think the thought is that this condition is sort of like something that connects the family. And then it turns out that they find people in the village who aren't in the family. There's some of them who also have the condition. And so like this whole community is sort of interconnected genetically, but also I think it's supposed to be more like relationally, and we're all in this together sort of type of connection. Um, so the Big Amachi's husband had it, his first son had it, Philippos had it, Ninan had it, and then before that there were many people who had it. So the condition and the fear of it was sort of this unifying factor in the lives of the community. And I think I've said most of it. Another theme that I think was an intentional theme, is the theme of progress. So this is a book of progress, so obviously progression from 1897 to 1977, but in that time, India went from being a colony of Great Britain to being an independent country, and sort of in between had stages and went through socialism, communism, to whatever the modern democracy that India is today. And so there's progress in terms of that. There's progress in terms of medicine. Like in 1900, nobody knew what the condition was. By 1977, they were able to define it genetically. This is exactly what it is. And Dr. Verghese really, really loves medicine, and he talks a lot about medicine and the progress of medicine. So there's progress in society, progress in medicine, progress in education, progress in social justice. That's a major theme. The caste system. In the first part of the century, this family, Big Amachi's family, are like landowners, and then there's some people who really were servants who really helped them a lot, are really very important people in their lives, but they're like the lowest caste, so they have, they're just very different, and by the end of the century, they become more like neighbors, and own property and such. So there's this progress in society, science, learning, and I think he sees this as the hope for us all here, is the progress. And medicine is seen as a key aspect of helping the suffering and moving society onward and upward. It's important for doctors to know about the patients. It's important to understand their culture, their religion, understand what people hope for and fear. And I think that with things like the religion and a lot of this connectedness, he's really trying to help us to understand some of that Indian culture, but also to just see the importance of all these things that are really important to people. For instance, religion, he talks a lot about religion, but it's like he's informing us of what is important to people, rather than, I don't think he really believes in religion. I'll get to that in a minute, but he thinks it's important to understand other people. I put down Introduction to Clinical Medicine 101. Well, this book is about what every medical student is supposed to learn in first year of medical school, is to be culturally aware, appreciate your patients, and your family issues, just all these issues that are really important. Like I said, he quotes the Bible frequently, but he also quotes Hindu religion a fair amount. There is a chapter, and they shall rise indestructible. But he doesn't, I don't believe, actually believe in a God who cares and resurrection. I'll talk about that in a minute. But he does quote religion quite a bit, and he knows it's important. It's important to people. He's not judgmental, I don't think at all. But he sees it as one of the aspects of people's lives that you need to understand. In one chapter, there's this convention called the Merrimon Convention, which actually is a real thing that happens, I guess, every year in the state of Kerala. And it's a gathering of people from all over to worship God and to have a retreat, I guess I would describe it. And it's a really big community. I think it's an important thing for the people in this community. So he talks about one year of this convention, and there's a preacher who comes to preach, and he mentions that it was supposed to be Billy Graham, but Billy Graham couldn't make it, so this guy is sort of a substitute for Billy Graham. And I think that what I think is I don't think he wanted to really, I think out of respect to Billy Graham, he didn't want it to be Billy Graham. So he invents a fictional preacher who comes to preach. And this preacher is starting to preach the gospel, but he's starting off with his own life and talking about how he was a sinner, and particularly about sexual sins when he was younger. And he's dependent on a translator to speak to the people, because most people didn't understand English. So the translator diverges quickly from the message of the preacher and starts talking about building a hospital. And so people think that this preacher out there is encouraging them to donate money and to get together and work to build a hospital. And I think this is seen as a good thing by the author, that it's certainly a good thing that people are getting together and pooling resources to build a hospital. And I don't really get the feeling that he thought it was that bad that the gospel didn't get preached. And they are indeed able to raise substantial funds and to build a hospital, and that's seen as progress. It's moving forward. It's a good thing. So another theme is it takes a village. The social support is really important. This community there's very good people, and they're helping each other. As I mentioned, most of the people in this story are good people, and the community is just a bunch of good people, and they help each other and are interconnected. So it's about community, social justice, education, medicine, humanity, and the goodness of people. So I asked myself, what is the worldview of the author. And I haven't seen other people say this, but I think his worldview is secular humanism. And Wikipedia defines that as a philosophy, belief system, or life stance that embraces human reason, logic, secular ethics, and philosophical naturalism while rejecting religious dogma, supernaturalism, and superstition as the basis of morality and decision making. This is a tragedy. There's no other way to put it. Is you feel so sad for many of these characters. There is like really inspiring sacrificial love in several characters. Elsie being maybe the most common one, but that recurs throughout the book. That's good. There's a sense that we need to know our fellow man and need to hope for them, strive to ease their way and save them from pain and death. But hope, I didn't feel a sense of hope in this book. I'm going to read this one passage that is, I think, just it exemplifies a number of things about his writing and maybe this sense of tragedy. So this is when Philippos is going to see if he can find Elsie again. Once he's gotten his life back together, and the train derails, all these people are thrown into the lake and are drowning, and that's what's happening here. Shiva, a woman's voice screams, and another from the opposite direction. God, my God! But the God of disasters is unmoved, and both voices gurgle horribly into silence. But in the sinking child he paddles to, he, an ordinary man, has a chance to do something of true account. Love the sick, each and every one, as if they were your own. He wrote out those words from Perseus for his daughter. Here, and just out of reach, is a child, not his child, yet all are his, to love, as if they were his own. This child may be beyond saving, and he may be too, but it matters not. It matters terribly. Pedaling furiously, the one-legged, one-armed man who cannot swim, moving to a child just out of reach. His flailing hand brushes tiny fingers, but they are already sinking past him. He takes a deep breath, pulling the skies, the stars, and the stars beyond those stars into his lungs. And Lord, Lord, my Lord, where are you? Lord, I breathe you in. Lord, breathe on me. Breathe on me, breath of God. For once in his life, freed of indecision, freed from doubt, he is absolutely sure of what he must do. So he's a hero. I mean, he's sacrificing, he's giving up his life to try to save other people. But the God of disasters is unmoved. So, like I said, it's tragedy. There's good things. There's a lot of good things there, in his worldview. But this book is about tragedy and sacrificial service. Hope for a better day. But my conclusion is it's sinking sand. Despair and sadness at the end. Whenever I think about suffering, I often read this passage from a different book, but this is sort of, I think, a semi-Christian view. From Lord of the Rings, Tolkien was a Christian. He helped C.S. Lewis become a Christian. So this is in the land of Mordor. So Frodo and Sam are near the end of their strength, and they are really, near death. The enemy is all about. Things are looking really bad. Frodo sighed and was asleep almost before the words were spoken. Sam struggled with his own weariness, and he took Frodo's hand, and there he sat silent till deep night fell. Then at last, to keep himself awake, he crawled from the hiding place and looked out. The land seemed full of creaking and cracking and sliding noises, but there was no sound, a voice, or a foot. Far above the Efelguth in the west, the night sky was still dim and pale. There, peeping among the cloud rack above, a dark tor high up in the mountains, Sam saw a white star twinkle for a while. The beauty of it smote his heart, and he looked up out of the forsaken land, and hope returned to him, for like a shaft, clear and cold, the thought pierced him that in the end the shadow was only a small and passing thing. There was light and high beauty forever beyond its reach. His song in the tower had been defiance rather than hope, for then he was thinking of himself. Now, for the moment, his own fate and even his master's ceased to trouble him. He crawled back into the brambles and laid himself by Frodo's side, and putting away all fear, he cast himself into a deep, untroubled sleep. And then, even more hope for us from 1 Corinthians. If for this life only we have hope in Christ, we are of all men most to be pitied. But in fact, Christ has been raised from the dead. Lo, I tell you a mystery, in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trump, the trumpet will sound, and the dead shall be raised incorruptible. Death is swallowed up in victory. O death, where is thy sting? O grave, where is thy victory? Thanks be to God. Therefore, be steadfast, unmovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord. Your labor is not in vain in the Lord. And then I just wanted to close with this. I have nothing more, but I'd be glad to answer any questions, or if people want to comment.
I think you did a phenomenal job with the summary. That's no news to that. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
I'd like to clarify for those of us who didn't read the book and probably not going to be able to find time to read it. I'm so grateful for such a thorough explanation of it, but the medical condition materials that you had in there, I just wanted to clarify how much of that good medicine 101 was actually in the book versus you supplying additional knowledge about it to explain, these conditions. Because what I learned sitting here today is about leprosy and about predisposition to drowning, different conditions that make people susceptible to those things.
Yeah. I think, when I said, like, introduction to clinical medicine, I think that he was very intentional in trying to make us understand other people. And, he is a professor of teaching medical students how to do that. That's his, when he was in San Antonio here, he started the Institute for Medicine and the Humanities. And I really think that, he's saying these things are important, these other non-medical things like the religion that people have and what they believe and what they're, like the fear that the family had with the condition, and trying to understand people so you can best serve them. That's what I think he was very intentional about that. He didn't exactly say that, but that really seems to me like what he was doing. So I'm sure.
I was gonna make a comment about, in his first book, he talks about how important it is to touch the patient and really know the body and listen to the patient and what they have to say. And I thought it was interesting that he put a character like Digby, who couldn't use his hands, in this situation where there were people who were actually losing their sense of touch as well. So I thought that was really important that he kind of explored that. The other point I wanted to make was that I really felt Philippos redeemed himself right at the end. It may have been tragic that he drowned, but it was like all of a sudden he wasn't being selfish. He wasn't doing things that were destroying, he was trying to be helpful. And so in that, it gave me hope that he actually kind of got it right at the very end.
Yeah.
So I thought that was brilliant, and that whole idea of water being a curative, we think of as a curative, and how we baptize babies, and yet for them it was a fear, and the monsoons were horrible, and they lost people at that time. So water has this real ambivalent relationship as a character almost in this book.
Yep, that's good comments. I agree.
Does the condition still exist?
Yes, the von Recklinghausen disease or neurofibromatosis is actually pretty common. It's a genetic disorder that, most genetic disorders are not, super common, but it's not a super rare disease either. It still exists. The vast majority of the medical stuff that he writes about is really, really very accurate. The condition is maybe just a little bit of a stretch though. Like I tried to look in the medical literature. Are there these families of people drowning because of this? And I didn't really find that. But it certainly does make sense that hearing loss because of the tumors on the nerve to the brain from the ears is well known as part of that disease. And he took a little bit of liberty of making it, so focused on drowning. I think again, it's because of the water. Part of it's because of the water. Like he sees the water as like what sort of uniting all these people because, in good ways and bad ways, that, it brings life and makes things grow and is good that way. But then every year they have this monsoon, and he describes the monsoons as very unpleasant for, for a few weeks of time every year. And so they all are looking forward to the monsoon. So I think he used the drowning, because he wanted to tie it in with the water. But it's not a big stretch to think that people with this condition would have trouble swimming. Because anything that requires, balance and knowing which way is up. If you're swimming underwater and you don't know which way is up, it can be bad. Yes, sir.
Just an aspect of the drowning. I'm the father of 6 children, and this was not covered in any of your comments, but buoyancy, human buoyancy is very slight. And myself, my wife, and all of my daughters had the property of, if they took not a great big breath, but just a normal breath, then and then just relaxed in the body, their nostrils or maybe even their mouth would be above the water. But not so with my son. He could take a deep breath as deep as he wanted, and the water would be up to here on him. And I've always had a hard time teaching him how to swim because he just wasn't as, and I don't know why that was, but he just wasn't as buoyant as the rest of us.
Yeah, we actually have a son-in-law who says, and I believe him, that it's very hard to swim. He's very muscular. He doesn't have any fat. And that's probably maybe your son too, I don't know. But because the fat is lighter than water. And so people who are very, very muscular without much body fat aren't as buoyant. And I know our son-in-law says it's really hard for him to swim. And to me, I've always swum, and I can't imagine not being able to swim. But, that buoyancy is.
Well, what was new was this orientation and the balance. You got to know what the right side is up. When you're swimming, you got to know which way the air is.
Yeah. Any other comments or questions?
Did you meet the author when he was here in San Antonio?
It's interesting. I knew he was here, and I knew what he was doing. And in his first book, Cutting for Stone, he actually references a number of people who I really know well, my partners, like Tom Mays and Dr. Cigarroa and Glenn Helf. They're 3 people he prominently gives acknowledgement to in the first book because they were involved with the liver transplant program, and I work with them all the time because. And so I didn't actually work with him. I'm not sure if I ever met him. But I knew he was there, and I knew that he had the Institute of Humanities and Medicine.
He came and spoke to this literature circle, revealing his first book.
Oh, did he? Oh,
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you all.
You did a great job. Thank you.